Hello again. I thought it might be interesting, especially for English viewers, to talk about a little known episode from the past, which was within the lifetime of some of those watching this. I've been talking a little bit too much, perhaps, about current affairs lately, and it might be interesting to think a little about something from history. This was all about the time that the British Army and some members of the government thought that it would be a bright idea to set off a dozen nuclear weapons in Yorkshire, a county in the north of England. Each of these would have been roughly as powerful as the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima. After the end of the Second World War, America was the only nation on Earth with nuclear weapons, or atom bombs as they were then known. Because of some traitors in both Britain and America, the Rosenbergs and in this country Klaus Fuchs, the Russians found out how to make their own bombs, and in 1949 the Soviet Union set off its first nuclear device. Britain didn't want to be dependent on America to defend it, and it wanted its own nuclear deterrent. In 1952, Britain successfully tested a nuclear weapon which was detonated in an old warship anchored off an island near Australia. So far so good. Now the British needed to test a nuclear weapon on land rather than at sea. The Americans were of course testing their own weapons on land in their country, so why shouldn't Britain do the same thing? At this time in 1953, Churchill was Prime Minister again, but he was very old, often drunk, and nowhere near as sharp mentally as once he had been. And so the Secretary of State for War didn't mention either to the Prime Minister or the other members of the Cabinet what was being planned. The first test had been planned and carried out without notifying the rest of the Cabinet beforehand, and so there was no reason to alarm them now by mentioning the second nuclear explosion which the armed forces were going to set off on the British mainland. The first site considered was a place called Duncansby Wick, which is on the Scottish coast near a town called Caithness. There was a problem though. The atomic bomb to be tested wasn't something neatly contained in a casing like a traditional bomb or missile nose cone. It was a really huge and unwieldy contraption about the size of a fridge freezer, with wires sticking out all over the place and a lot of exposed circuit boards. Because the site in Scotland was so damp and misty, there was a fear that moisture could cause a short circuit and malfunction. The thing is, there were to be 12 such tests, and all that damp made it too hazardous to keep trusting that the drizzle and fog wouldn't allow water to get into the works of these makeshift devices. The last thing you want, obviously with nuclear weapons, is for them to get wet and for short circuits to occur and perhaps for them to go off prematurely. Much better to have them somewhere safe and dry. The next place considered was a bit further south in Lincolnshire. Nook has been used as an RAF bombing range for many years, and it still is from time to time. The one slight difficulty with setting off an atomic bomb at Nook is that it's only 10 miles or so along the coast from the seaside resort of Cleethorpes. Although not ideal, this was the second choice for the scientists from Aldermaston, and they thought for a while that it would be the perfect place for this nuclear testing. They thought that if the test was carried out while the wind was blowing in the right direction, the radioactive fallout would be blown out into the North Sea and across Europe rather than drifting back across the Lincolnshire potato fields. Then somebody had an even better idea. They hit upon the village of Skipsey in Yorkshire. This too was on the coast between Hull and Bridlington. Of course, people living in the village would have to be turfed out of their homes before they were destroyed, but that was a minor matter. During the Second World War, something similar had been done in the village of Imber on Salisbury Plain. The villagers there had been told they'd have to leave their homes just for 6 months, as the army wanted to practice hand-to-hand fighting in a village environment in preparation for the invasion of Europe. Once they'd left, though, the villagers of Imber were never allowed back into their homes. It's still used for training in urban warfare to this day. Skipsey fitted the bill neatly for another reason. It was hoped that the second testing of a British atom bomb could be a tower shot, which is to say the device would be exploded somewhere above the ground. Skipsey had a Norman church with a tower. Why not install the bomb in the tower of the church, and then there'd be no need to go to all the trouble of building a big tower out of scaffolding or something of that sort? Skipsey was also near an RAF bombing range, so it was almost as perfect as Don and Nook would have been. By late 1953, everything was coming together nicely and all the arrangements were in hand. The only people in the cabinet who knew what was going on were the Secretary of State for War and the Minister of Defence. Everything had been conducted on a strict need-to-know basis. It would still have to be cleared with the Prime Minister, of course, but it was hoped that this was merely a formality. Alas, it proved to be nothing of the sort. Winston Churchill might have been 79 years of age, deaf, fond of alcohol and not quite with it, but he proved to have more sense than to allow anybody to set off an atom bomb at the English seaside. He refused point blank to give permission for such a thing and insisted that somebody apply pressure to Australia instead to use a patch of desert there, which was finally done. Today, the idea that anybody could possibly have thought it would be a good idea to detonate nuclear weapons in England is so crazy that we can hardly credit it, which only goes to show how standards of what is sensible and acceptable can change very greatly in the course of a generation or two. I'll give a link in the description to this video to a news item about this about 5 or 6 years ago.